The British Empire now reigns over lands where the sun never sets. Delve into the complexities of colonial expansion and its enduring impact on cultures and societies worldwide. Vibe train punch that like pop aboard with a subscribe, and let's level up this journey. Bigger surprises ahead. Trust me, you'll want to stick around. Let's start the video. 1763. The 7 Years' War is over. European powers clashed all over the globe. In the end, the British Empire emerged victorious. They defeated both France and Spain. Britain claimed new lands in India, the West Indies, and, above all, North America. France lost nearly all its colonies. Imagine giving up 3 million square miles, about the size of all of Europe. The British now rule an empire where the sun never sets. But victory planted the seeds for future conflict. The war's cost ballooned Britain's national debt. Interest payments alone gobbled up more than half the nation's yearly spending. New American territories needed defending. Bitter imperial rivals were ready to pounce. And native tribes, especially those once allied with the French, could not be ignored. In 1763, Chief Pontiac of the Odawa sparked a revolt. British forts west of the Appalachians came under attack. Ironically, the toughest challenges would soon come from the colonies Britain vowed to protect. It had been 157 years since the first British colony was founded in North America. Now, there were 26 colonies spread across North America and the West Indies. 13 of these lay along the eastern seaboard. After years of prosperity and immigration, their population topped 2 million. But these 13 colonies were very different from one another. Each had its own history, character, and system of government. Some were founded by seekers of religious freedom. The Puritans in Massachusetts, Catholics in Maryland, Quakers in Pennsylvania. Many settlers were rugged pioneers chasing dreams of plenty. Others arrived destitute, desperate, or even against their will. Slavery was legal in all these colonies. The North, enslaved Africans made up about 5% of the population. In the South, plantations dominated. In Virginia, slaves were around 40% of the people. In South Carolina, they reached 60%. Early settlers were almost all English. Over time, Irish, Scottish, and German immigrants added new colors to the mix. They all shaped a bold, emerging American culture. It was less deferential, more enterprising, more self-confident. Old ties with Britain began to fade. For years, Britain practiced salutary neglect and let the colonies run their own affairs. But change was on the horizon. Britain faced a huge debt crisis after the war. The colonies were expected to help fund their own defense. Here's a striking fact. A Briton paid about 26 shillings in tax a year. New Englander paid just 1 shilling. It wasn't the tax amount that stoked anger. It was how taxes were raised. British Prime Minister George Grenville was determined to fix the spiraling debt. He believed new colonial taxes were the solution. In April 1764, Grenville introduced 2 new revenue measures. The Sugar Act. It even lowered taxes on foreign sugar and molasses, but aimed to boost collection efficiency. The Stamp Act. This taxed every legal and commercial document, from newspapers and playing cards to licenses and land grants. These taxes were minor by British standards. Englishmen had paid similar ones for 70 years, yet the colonies erupted in protest. Merchants, lawyers, and business owners, the colonies' sharpest voices, spoke out. They warned, "This tax will rob us of our rights. It would drain cash, freeze trade, stall industry, and it felt like a step toward modern-day slavery." The issue was about consent. Colonists cried, "No taxation without representation." They claimed their British rights, protected by the Constitution, were under attack. Grenville countered with virtual representation, the idea that all British MPs represented everyone, even if most Britons couldn't vote. Critics found that excuse weak, even among Parliament members. Pitt the Elder, a former Prime Minister, lambasted this approach, calling it a rotten part of the Constitution. In 1765, colonial assemblies met to protest. In Virginia, Patrick Henry emerged as a radical leader. He proposed resolutions declaring that the original settlers brought with them all British rights, and that only the people could tax themselves. Yet, deep-rooted loyalty to Britain the term Motsuo Patriots. Emerged, those avoiding conflict were later called Loyalists. Communities and even families split over these divisions. In New England, a group called the Sons of Liberty took shape. Led by Samuel Adams, the group included figures like John Hancock, Joseph Warren, and Paul Revere. Tension peaked in Massachusetts. Boston had been a hotbed of rebellion since the Stamp Act. In 1768, British soldiers were quartered in Boston. On March 5, 1770, an altercation turned deadly. Surrounded and pelted with snowballs and rocks, a small British detachment lost nerve and opened fire. 5 locals died. This event, known as the Boston Massacre, became powerful propaganda. Pamphlets and prints, like those by Paul Revere, spread the story. Blood was spilt. Emotions soared. "Let March 5th never be forgot," wrote Bostonian Samuel Savage. Many feared this was the start of more chaos. Yet, voices on both sides still called for calm. Governor Thomas Hutchinson pulled troops from Boston and put those involved on trial. With a strong defense by John Adams, the soldiers were acquitted. Back in Britain, a new Prime Minister, Lord North, took charge. A close friend of the king, he was a staunch advocate of parliamentary authority and held the post for 12 years. Economic damage from boycotts forced him to repeal most of the Townshend taxes, except the tax on tea. Calm seemed to return, but mistrust lingered. New England merchants, who depended on shipping and trade, resented British restrictions on commerce. Many turned to smuggling to bypass harsh import duties. British crackdowns only fanned the flames of resentment. Even prominent figures like John Hancock found themselves caught in the crossfire. In 1772, the Sons of Liberty struck back. They boarded the Royal Navy schooner, HMS Gaspee, and set it ablaze. Meanwhile, Britain's largest company, the East India Company, teetered on the edge of bankruptcy. It controlled British trade with India, China, and the East Indies. A credit crisis now threatened its survival. In 1773, to rescue the company, Parliament allowed it to sell tea directly to the colonies. Tariff exemptions made its tea cheaper than that of local smugglers. Still, a small tax of 3 pence per pound remained. The new Tea Act angered local merchants and patriots. Once again, cries of "no taxation without representation" rang out. 7 company ships set sail across the Atlantic, carrying 250 tons of tea. The Sons of Liberty pressured tea dealers to reject these shipments. In Philadelphia, thousands of locals threatened anyone who tried unloading the tea. Most ships turned back under the pressure. In Boston, Governor Hutchinson had enough. He forced 3 company ships into the harbor. On a December evening in 1773, patriots in Boston took bold action. Disguised as Native Americans, a symbol of their new identity, they boarded the ships. They broke open 340 chests of tea and dumped the contents into the harbor. A total of 92,000 pounds of tea was ruined, worth nearly $2 million today. This defiant act became known as the Boston Tea Party. Patriot lawyer John Adams later praised it as a magnificent movement, a bold stand that would be remembered. Meanwhile in London, the reaction was harsh. The British government saw lawlessness and mob rule. They warned, "Enough is enough. If we don't act now, our authority in North America will crumble." The gloves were coming off. Today, you'll see countless history documentaries, but finding the truly great ones is hard amidst a flood of low-quality or AI-generated content. That's why many viewers now turn to curated streaming services like Nebula. Nebula is built by creators, for creators. It guarantees videos made with passion and integrity on fascinating topics. For instance, the channel Mustard explores curious engineering projects and amazing machines from the past. Their stories are gripping, and the visuals are top-notch. Nebula hosts hundreds of great creators across all genres, from art and food to gaming and history. And when you subscribe, you support creators directly. For Epic History viewers, there's a special discount, 40% off the annual plan. That's just $36 a year or $3 a month. There's also a lifetime plan for $300 with no strings attached. Plus, every Nebula subscriber gets a monthly guest pass to share with a friend. Full access. For a week, no payment info needed. Thanks to current Nebula subscribers, and to everyone else watching, quality history content thrives. Special thanks to our historical consultant, Professor Frank Cogliano of the University of Edinburgh. And thanks to all our Patreon supporters. Join us on Patreon for early, ad-free access, exclusive updates, and a say in future topics.